The shadow beneath the badge. Detective Emma Carter wiped her brow as the unforgiving summer sun bore down on the streets of San Diego. A seasoned DEA agent, she had spent the last 8 months undercover infiltrating a powerful narcotics ring led by Victor Cardenas, a name that sent shivers through the criminal underworld. Cardenas was ruthless, his empire built on pain and exploitation, and Emma was determined to bring him down. Today was supposed to be a pivotal moment. Emma's team had intercepted intelligence that a large shipment of synthetic opioids was being smuggled through the city's industrial district. With months of careful planning, her operation was poised to deliver a decisive blow. But as she navigated through traffic in her unmarked sedan, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her instincts flared when she noticed a black SUV trailing her for several blocks. At first, she dismissed it as a coincidence, but the vehicle's persistent presence nagged at her. She decided to test her suspicion, making a sudden left turn onto a side street. The SUV followed. Emma's grip on the steering wheel tightened as she made another abrupt turn, then another. The shadow remained. She reached for her radio to alert her team but hesitated. If this was Cardenas's men, calling for backup now might blow her cover. She resolved to handle it on her own until she had more information. Red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, and a surge of confusion washed over her. The black SUV wasn't part of the cartel. It was law enforcement. Emma pulled over, her thoughts racing. She grabbed her badge and ID, ready to explain the situation. A towering officer with a grizzled demeanor approached her window. His badge read Captain Keller. "License and registration," he barked, his tone icy. Emma held out her DEA credentials. "Captain, I'm Special Agent Emma Carter with the DEA. I'm currently on an active operation. If you contact..." "Step out of the car," Keller interrupted, his voice sharp enough to slice through her explanation. Emma frowned. This wasn't protocol. She knew the local precinct had been briefed about her operation. "Captain, I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. If you cold..." "I said, step out of the car," Keller roared, his voice drawing the attention of pedestrians nearby. Emma complied, her movements deliberate and calm. As she stepped out, Keller seized her wrist and twisted it behind her back, slamming her against the car. The cold bite of handcuffs encircled her wrists. "Captain, this is a mistake," she protested, anger and disbelief lacing her voice. "I'm a federal agent." Keller sneered. "You think that badge makes you untouchable. We'll see about that." As he dragged her toward the black SUV, Emma caught sight of a young officer standing near the vehicle, his expression uneasy. His badge read Officer Diaz. Unlike Keller, Diaz seemed reluctant, his eyes darting nervously between his superior and the unfolding scene. "Sir," Diaz ventured hesitantly, "her badge checks out. She's DEA. Shouldn't we verify with her office?" "Stay in your lane, Diaz," Keller snapped, his grip on Emma tightening. As she was shoved into the backseat, Emma's sharp gaze caught something alarming. A small emblem on Keller's jacket, partially obscured but unmistakable. It was the symbol of Cardenas's operation. A sickening realization dawned. Keller wasn't just a rogue cop. He was on Cardenas's payroll. The SUV sped off, taking back streets and alleyways to avoid prying eyes. Emma's heart raced as she mentally mapped the route. She knew she was being taken somewhere isolated, somewhere Keller and his accomplices could operate without interference. "You really thought you could play in my city without consequences?" Keller taunted, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "Cardenas doesn't like nosy feds sticking their noses where they don't belong." Emma's mind worked furiously. She needed to stay calm and gather as much intel as possible. "How long have you been working for him, Keller? Or is he just another thug you sold your badge to?" Keller's smirk faltered for a moment before returning with venom. "You don't know how the world works, Agent Carter. Sometimes you have to make compromises to keep the peace." "Compromises?" Emma shot back. "Tell that to the families of the kids overdosing on Cardenas's poison." The SUV pulled into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Keller dragged Emma out, his grip bruising, and shoved her toward the dim interior. The warehouse was eerily quiet, its walls lined with stacks of forgotten crates and rusted machinery. Emma's sharp eyes scanned the environment, noting potential exits and improvised weapons. "You're in over your head," Keller growled. "Cardenas wanted me to send a message, and you're going to help me deliver it." Before Emma could respond, movement outside the warehouse caught her attention. Through a grimy window, she saw a familiar car parked discreetly in the shadows. Officer Diaz had followed them. A flicker of hope ignited in Emma's chest. If Diaz was brave, or foolish, enough to intervene, she might have a chance. "You're making a mistake," Emma said, her tone steady. "Cardenas doesn't leave loose ends. The moment you're a liability, he'll cut you loose. Just like he did with his last corrupt cop in Tucson." Keller's expression darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Emma pressed. "Detective Harbour. Found in his car, 2 bullets in his chest, staged to look like a gang hit. That's how Cardenas deals with cops who outlive their usefulness." Keller's jaw tightened, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Before he could respond, the warehouse door creaked open, and Officer Diaz stepped inside, his hand resting nervously on his holstered weapon. "Captain," Diaz said, his voice trembling but resolute, "let her go. This isn't right." Keller turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You're out of your depth, rookie. Walk away before you get yourself killed." Diaz's hand tightened on his weapon. "I already radioed the precinct. Backup is on the way." The tension in the room was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity. Emma's gaze flicked between Keller and Diaz, her mind calculating her next move. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens broke the silence, growing louder with every passing moment. Keller's composure cracked as he realized his time was running out. In that moment of distraction, Emma lunged, slamming her shoulder into Keller's chest with all her strength. He stumbled backward, cursing, as Diaz drew his weapon, training it on his superior. "Don't move, Captain," Diaz commanded, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. The sirens reached a crescendo as police cars screeched to a halt outside the warehouse. Officers poured in, their weapons drawn, barking commands. Keller, now cornered, raised his hands in surrender, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. As the officers secured the scene and placed Keller in custody, Emma turned to Diaz. "You just saved my life," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. Diaz nodded, his expression conflicted. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing." The two shared a brief moment of understanding before Emma's phone buzzed with a message from her team. "Cardenas spotted at the docks. Operation still active." The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning, unveiling the depths of corruption. As Emma stepped out of the chaotic warehouse, the humid air outside felt like a reprieve. Sirens wailed in the background as officers and agents worked to secure the scene. Captain Keller was in cuffs, being escorted to a waiting police vehicle. His face was a blend of fury and defeat, his sneering confidence replaced by the grim realization that his double life had crumbled. Emma turned to Officer Diaz, whose hands were trembling slightly, though he kept his composure. "You did the right thing, Diaz," she said. "It takes guts to stand up to someone like Keller." Diaz shook his head, his voice tight. "I had no idea it was this bad. I joined the force to protect people, not this." He gestured toward Keller being loaded into the back of a squad car. "Corruption festers in silence," Emma replied. "Exposing it takes courage and action." Diaz's radio crackled, and he quickly answered, stepping away to communicate with his precinct. Emma used the brief moment to check her phone. The update from her surveillance team was clear. Victor Cardenas was overseeing the shipment personally, a rare move for someone who usually kept his distance. It was an opportunity she couldn't afford to miss, but Keller's arrest had thrown a wrench into her carefully laid plans. Cardenas would undoubtedly hear about his enforcer's downfall soon, and when he did, he'd either double down or go underground. Time was not on her side. Agent Marcus Hart, Emma's partner, appeared at her side, his expression grim. "Keller's dirty, all right," he said, holding up a plastic evidence bag containing Keller's phone and a small notebook. "This thing's a gold mine. Contacts, coded messages, and even a few bank transfers tied to Cardenas's shell companies. But it's going to take time to decrypt." "Time we don't have," Emma said. "Cardenas is at the docks, and Keller's arrest is going to spook him. We need to act now." Hart hesitated. "You're sure about this?" Keller had layers of protection. "If Cardenas is on site, he's not going to be alone." Emma nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I didn't spend 8 months undercover just to let him slip through my fingers. If we move quickly, we can catch him off guard." Hart sighed, then handed her a fresh comms unit. "Your call. I'll round up a team." The industrial district on the waterfront was a labyrinth of shipping containers, towering cranes, and winding access roads. The air was thick with the stench of salt and diesel, and the distant hum of machinery created an ominous backdrop as Emma and her team arrived at a staging area a few blocks from the docks. Officer Diaz had insisted on coming along, his resolve hardened by the events at the warehouse. "I want to help," Diaz said as they geared up. "I know these streets, the layout. I can be useful." Hart glanced at Emma skeptically, but she nodded. "All right, but you follow my lead. This isn't patrol work, Diaz. It's going to get dangerous." Diaz gave a firm nod, his expression resolute. Emma briefed the team. "Cardenas is overseeing the shipment of synthetic opioids bound for distribution across the state. We have confirmation that Keller was his inside man, but there's no telling how many other people he's compromised. Assume everyone on site is armed and dangerous. Our goal is to intercept the shipment and take Cardenas alive if possible." The team murmured their acknowledgement, double-checking their weapons and equipment. Emma felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always accompanied high-stakes operations. She looked at Diaz, who was visibly nervous but steady. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, his voice tight but determined. The team moved in silence, splitting into smaller groups to cover more ground. Emma and Diaz took the southern approach, weaving through rows of stacked containers. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. Emma's senses were on high alert, scanning for any sign of Cardenas or his men. Through the narrow gaps between the containers, she spotted a cluster of figures near a large cargo ship. The dock was lit by harsh floodlights, casting long shadows across the asphalt. At the center of the group stood Victor Cardenas, tall and imposing, his presence commanding even from a distance. He was flanked by at least 10 armed guards, their stances rigid and alert. Emma motioned for Diaz to stay low as she pulled out a pair of binoculars. She observed the scene, noting the guards' positions and the unmarked vans being loaded with crates. The operation was well organized, and Cardenas appeared confident, unaware of the storm about to descend. Diaz whispered, "What's the play?" Emma thought for a moment before replying. "We need to secure the shipment first. If we move on Cardenas too early, his men could scatter or destroy the evidence." She relayed instructions through her comms. Hart's voice crackled in her ear. "Copy that. We'll secure the perimeter and wait for your signal." Emma and Diaz crept closer, staying in the shadows. Her pulse quickened as they approached one of the vans. 2 guards stood nearby, their attention focused on a heated conversation between Cardenas and one of his lieutenants. Emma gestured to Diaz, signaling him to distract the guards. Diaz hesitated but nodded, picking up a small rock and tossing it toward a nearby stack of containers. The clatter drew the guards' attention, and they moved to investigate. Emma seized the opportunity, slipping into the van and examining the crates inside. Each crate was packed with vacuum-sealed bags of white powder, enough to flood the streets with lethal doses. Emma snapped pictures with her phone, documenting the evidence. She planted a GPS tracker on the van's undercarriage before slipping out undetected. Diaz rejoined her, his eyes wide with adrenaline. Now what? Emma smirked. Now we take down Cardenas. She signaled the rest of the team, who converged on the docks with precision. The coordinated assault was swift and overwhelming. Flashbangs exploded, disorienting the guards, while agents moved in with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Chaos erupted as gunfire broke out, the sound echoing across the waterfront. Emma and Diaz pushed forward, using the containers for cover. She spotted Cardenas attempting to retreat toward a waiting speedboat. Her heart pounded as she sprinted after him, dodging stray bullets and barking orders into her comms. Cardenas is making a run for it. I need backup on the east side. Diaz was right behind her, his determination unwavering despite the danger. They cornered Cardenas at the edge of the dock, his path blocked by the roiling black water below. It's over, Cardenas, Emma shouted, her weapon trained on him. Drop your weapon and surrender. Cardenas smirked, his dark eyes glittering with defiance. You think this ends with me? There's always someone else ready to take my place. Maybe, Emma replied, her voice cold. But you won't be around to see it. Before he could respond, Diaz stepped forward, his own weapon drawn. Hands up. Now. For a moment, Cardenas seemed to consider his options. Then, with a resigned sneer, he dropped his gun and raised his hands. More chilling was the revelation that Matheson had ties to a private security firm called Black Horizon. The firm was known for operating in legal gray areas, providing muscle for high-profile clients while keeping their activities shrouded in secrecy. According to Keller, Black Horizon had been instrumental in laundering Cardenas's drug money and intimidating anyone who posed a threat to their operations. This goes way beyond the department, Emma said as she briefed her team. Black Horizon isn't just laundering money. They're actively involved in enforcement and logistics for Cardenas. If we're going to take this down, we need to hit them hard and fast. Hart crossed his arms. You're talking about taking on Matheson and a private army. We'll need the Bureau's support for this. Emma nodded, already in motion. But we can't wait for red tape to clear. We need a way to draw Matheson out. Diaz, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly spoke up. Matheson has a private residence in La Jolla. If he's feeling the heat, that's where he'll go. Emma raised an eyebrow. How do you know that? Diaz hesitated, then said, My dad used to work maintenance for the place. He always said Matheson treated it like his fortress, kept everything off the books there. Emma considered this. If Matheson's retreating, he'll take key evidence with him. Diaz, can you get us a layout of the property? Diaz nodded. I think so. Later that evening, Emma, Diaz, and Hart prepared for what they knew would be the riskiest part of the operation. With the support of a small tactical team, they planned to raid Matheson's La Jolla property. Emma's gut told her Matheson wouldn't go down without a fight, but the stakes were too high to back down now. As they approached the sprawling estate, the team moved silently, blending into the shadows cast by the towering palm trees that lined the property. Emma's heart pounded as they neared the gate, her instincts on high alert. Diaz pointed to a side entrance. This leads to the guest house. From there, we can access the main building. Emma nodded, signaling the team to split into groups. As they breached the property, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The guest house was empty, but as they moved toward the main building, Emma's fears were confirmed. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the distance, followed by the metallic click of weapons being loaded. Black Horizon, Hart muttered, gripping his rifle. The team took cover as a group of armed men emerged from the shadows, their movements coordinated and lethal. A firefight erupted, the tranquil night shattered by the crack of gunfire. Emma ducked behind a stone pillar, returning fire as her mind raced. If Matheson had called in Black Horizon, it meant he was here, and desperate. Through the chaos, Emma spotted Diaz covering a teammate, his training kicking in despite the intensity of the situation. She shouted over the noise, Diaz, cover the left flank. Hart with me. The two moved toward the main building, weaving through the chaos. As they breached the front door, Emma's pulse quickened. The opulent interior was eerily silent, save for the distant sounds of the firefight outside. In the study, they found Matheson, seated behind a massive oak desk. He didn't flinch as they entered, his expression cold and calculating. "Agent Carter," he said smoothly, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Emma raised her weapon. "It's over, Matheson. Stand down." Matheson smirked. "You think you've won. You have no idea what you're up against." Before Emma could respond, he pressed a button under the desk, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a passageway. "Go after him," Hart shouted as Matheson bolted. Emma and Hart pursued, their adrenaline surging as they descended into the hidden passage. The walls were lined with crates and documents, evidence of the sprawling corruption Matheson had orchestrated. As they cornered Matheson in a dead-end room, Emma leveled her weapon. "It's over, Matheson. Surrender." Matheson hesitated, his gaze darting around the room. Finally, he raised his hands, his smirk replaced by a look of resignation. "You may have won this battle, Agent Carter, but the war is far from over." Emma cuffed him, her resolve unshaken. "We'll see about that." As they escorted Matheson out, the weight of the victory settled on Emma. They had cracked the web of corruption wide open, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Somewhere in the shadows, another threat was already waiting to rise. Agents swarmed in, cuffing Cardenas and securing the area. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the first step in dismantling a much larger network. As the team began cataloging evidence and detaining suspects, Emma turned to Diaz. "You did good tonight," she said, her tone sincere. Diaz exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time. "Thanks. I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like we're actually making a difference." Emma smiled. "We are, one step at a time." But as she glanced at the distant lights of the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that Cardenas's words held a grain of truth. There was always someone else lurking in the shadows, waiting to fill the void. This victory was just the beginning. The web unravels. The calm after the storm was deceptive. The docks, once alive with chaos, now sat under a blanket of eerie silence, interrupted only by the distant hum of the city. The DEA agents worked efficiently, combing through evidence, securing detainees, and cataloging the massive shipment of synthetic opioids. Victor Cardenas sat in the back of a secure van, his smug expression betraying no fear. For him, this was just another inconvenience, not the end of his empire. Emma Carter watched from a distance, her mind spinning. She knew the takedown of Cardenas was significant, but it felt incomplete. The nagging sense of unfinished business gnawed at her. The arrest of Captain Keller, and now Cardenas, meant one thing. The deeper layers of corruption were about to come into sharp focus. As the night wore on, Emma and Officer Diaz sat in a temporary command post set up near the docks. Hart entered, carrying a folder filled with preliminary findings from Keller's phone and notebook. "You're going to want to see this," Hart said, placing the folder on the table. Emma flipped it open. The pages revealed a network of names, business executives, law enforcement officials, and even a judge, linked to various offshore accounts and coded transactions. At the center of it all was a connection between Keller and a name that made Emma's stomach drop: Deputy Chief Greg Matheson. "Matheson," Diaz blurted, his face pale. "He's one of the most respected officers in the department. He's the reason I joined the force." Emma's jaw tightened. Respected or not, this isn't a coincidence. Keller's phone records show frequent calls to Matheson, and the notebook ties them to the same shell companies funding Cardenas's operations. Hart nodded. If Matheson's involved, it explains how Keller managed to operate under the radar for so long. The question is, how deep does this go? Emma's mind raced. Taking down Keller and Cardenas had been challenging enough, but going after someone like Matheson would require undeniable proof. If they acted prematurely, it could ruin everything. "We'll need more than this," Emma said. "Matheson's too high profile. If we're wrong, it'll destroy our credibility." Hart smirked. "Good thing we've got Keller. He's already cracking under pressure." In a secure interrogation room at the DEA's field office, Captain Keller sat slumped in a metal chair. His bravado from earlier was gone, replaced by a sullen expression. The realization that he was expendable to Cardenas's empire had begun to sink in. When Emma entered, he looked up, his eyes narrowing. "You're wasting your time," Keller said, his voice hoarse. "You'll never take down Cardenas's real backers. They're untouchable." Emma pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her expression calm but intense. "Untouchable like you. Look where that got you." Keller scoffed but didn't respond. Emma leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You think Cardenas will protect you. He left you out to dry the moment you became a liability. Right now, your best shot at avoiding a life sentence is to cooperate." Keller's jaw tightened, but Emma saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You've already lost everything," she continued. "Your badge, your career, your freedom. What do you have to gain by staying loyal to a man who sees you as disposable?" Keller's hands clenched into fists on the table. After a long pause, he exhaled sharply. "Fine. What do you want to know?" Emma's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. "Everything." By dawn, Keller had provided enough intel to make Emma's head spin. He confirmed the involvement of Deputy Chief Matheson and painted a damning picture of the San Diego Police Department's inner workings. Matheson had orchestrated the entire scheme, using his influence to shield Keller and ensure Cardenas's shipments moved undisturbed. Shadows in high places. The drive back to the DEA field office was quiet. The team had secured Deputy Chief Matheson, but the victory felt hollow. His words echoed in Emma's mind. The war is far from over. She had no illusions about the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. The web of corruption wasn't limited to San Diego. It reached far beyond. Matheson sat in the back of the armored vehicle, his hands cuffed and his face composed, as though the night's events were a mere inconvenience. He exuded a quiet arrogance, a man who believed he was untouchable. Emma studied him through the rearview mirror, her jaw tight. Whatever secrets he held, they were critical to dismantling the entire operation. Back at the field office, Matheson was placed in a high-security interrogation room. Emma and her team gathered in a nearby observation room, reviewing the evidence they had collected from his La Jolla estate. Stacks of files, encrypted drives, and burner phones filled the table in front of them. Each item was a puzzle piece, and Emma knew the picture they would form was far larger and darker than they had anticipated. Agent Hart leaned over one of the laptops, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "This is a treasure trove," he said. "Bank records, transaction logs, client lists. Matheson was the hub for everything. But there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" Emma asked, already dreading the answer. Hart sighed. "Most of the files are heavily encrypted. It'll take days, maybe weeks, to crack these without the right tools." Emma frowned, her frustration mounting. "We don't have weeks. If we wait, whoever's above Matheson will vanish, and the entire operation will rebuild." Diaz, who had been quietly reviewing one of the files, spoke up. "What if we make Matheson talk? He's arrogant, sure, but he knows he's cornered. He might spill if we apply enough pressure." Emma nodded slowly. "It's worth a shot. But we have to play it smart. Matheson isn't going to crack under threats. We need to make him believe cooperating is in his best interest." The interrogation room was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Matheson's face. Emma entered, followed by Hart, and placed a folder on the table in front of him. Matheson leaned back in his chair, his expression impassive. "I'm impressed," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've managed to disrupt one arm of the operation. But you're out of your depth, Agent Carter. You can't stop this." Emma ignored his posturing and opened the folder. Inside were photographs of the evidence they had seized from his estate, as well as screenshots of his encrypted files. "You've been careful, I'll give you that," Emma said, her tone measured, "but not careful enough. We have everything we need to tie you to Cardenas and Black Horizon." Matheson chuckled, shaking his head. "You have nothing. Those files won't hold up in court without decryption, and even if they did, the people above me would make sure it never sees the light of day." Emma leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "You're right about one thing. This operation is bigger than you. But that doesn't mean you're untouchable. Right now, you're looking at a life sentence. Cooperation is your only way out." Matheson's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. "You think I'm afraid of prison? I've made arrangements. My people will ensure I'm taken care of." Emma placed a second folder on the table and opened it. Inside were photographs of Keller, Cardenas, and several other key players they had taken down in the past 24 hours. She slid one photo toward Matheson, a picture of Keller in custody, his face bruised and defeated. "Keller thought the same thing," Emma said quietly. "But he's talking, and the people he's implicating aren't happy about it. How long do you think you'll last when they realize you're a liability?" Matheson's composure cracked, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Emma pressed on, her voice calm but unyielding. "You're not the first corrupt official I've taken down, Matheson, and you won't be the last. But you have a choice. Go down alone, or take the chance to protect yourself by giving us what we need." The room was silent for a long moment. Matheson's eyes darted to the folder, then back to Emma. Finally, he exhaled sharply and leaned forward. "Fine. But if I cooperate, I want guarantees. Witness protection, reduced charges, the works." Emma didn't flinch. "That depends on what you give us. Start talking." Matheson's confession was damning. He confirmed Keller's accounts of the San Diego Police Department's involvement in the narcotics operation, but revealed something far more alarming. Black Horizon wasn't just a private security firm. It was a front for an international syndicate operating in multiple countries. The syndicate used Black Horizon to launder money, smuggle drugs, and eliminate threats. "They're ghosts," Matheson said. "No paper trail, no digital footprint. Everything goes through intermediaries. Even I don't know who's really in charge. But you know how to find them," Emma said, her eyes narrowing. Matheson hesitated. "There's a summit. High-level players meet once a year to discuss strategy and allocate resources. The next one's in 2 weeks in Jakarta. That's where you'll find them." Emma exchanged a glance with Hart. This was the break they needed, but it came with risks. If they acted on Matheson's intel, and it turned out to be a trap, it could jeopardize everything. "Why should we believe you?" Emma asked, her tone skeptical. "Because I'm not stupid," Matheson replied. "If you take them down, it's the only way I survive. They won't come after me if they're too busy scrambling to save themselves." Back in the observation room, Emma and her team debriefed. Hart looked uneasy as he reviewed Matheson's statements. "This summit could be our chance to bring down the entire syndicate. But Jakarta, that's a whole different ballgame. We'd be operating outside our jurisdiction." "We don't have a choice," Emma said. "If we let this slip, we may never get another chance. We need to move fast." Diaz, who had been silent, finally spoke. "I want in." Emma frowned. "This isn't your fight, Diaz. You've already done more than enough." Diaz shook his head. "This is my fight. I've seen what corruption does to people, how it tears communities apart. I can't just walk away now." Emma studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but you follow orders, and you don't take unnecessary risks." The plan was set in motion. With federal support, Emma's team began preparing for the operation in Jakarta. They coordinated with international agencies, gathering intel on the summit and its participants. Every detail mattered: timing, entry points, extraction routes. As the days passed, Emma felt the weight of the mission pressing down on her. This wasn't just about taking down Cardenas or Matheson anymore. It was about dismantling an entire network of corruption and ensuring it couldn't rebuild. The stakes had never been higher. Late one night, as she reviewed the mission plans, Diaz approached her. "Do you think we'll pull this off?" he asked, his voice quiet. Emma didn't look up from her work. "I think we have to." Diaz nodded, his expression somber. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're leading this. You don't back down, even when the odds are against you." Emma finally met his gaze, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Neither do you, Diaz. That's why we're going to win." As the countdown to the Jakarta operation began, Emma steeled herself for what was to come. The battle against corruption was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Operation Jakarta, the gathering storm. The 2 weeks leading up to the Jakarta operation passed in a blur of meticulous planning, sleepless nights, and growing tension. Emma Carter and her team had secured limited cooperation from Interpol and the Indonesian National Police, though their involvement was more of a quiet nod than active participation. The summit of the international syndicate, as Deputy Chief Matheson had described it, was an unprecedented opportunity to cut off the Hydra's head. But it was also a gamble, one that could cost lives if anything went wrong. The arrival. Jakarta's humid air clung to Emma as she stepped off the plane. The bustling city was a sensory overload of sights, sounds, and smells, but her focus remained unshaken. With Hart and Diaz by her side, she moved through the crowded terminal like a predator stalking prey. Their cover identities were airtight: American corporate representatives visiting Indonesia for a trade conference. As they settled into their safe house, a nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood, Emma laid out the mission plan. The summit was being held in an exclusive resort on a private island just off the Jakarta coast. The location was well guarded, accessible only by invitation, and secured transportation. "Matheson's intel gives us 2 entry points," Emma explained, pointing to a map spread across the dining table. "The main dock, which is heavily monitored, and a secondary service dock used for deliveries. We'll pose as catering staff to gain access." Hart nodded, scanning the map. "And once we're in," Emma's expression hardened, "we'll identify key players and gather intel. Taking them all down at once isn't realistic, but if we can extract one of the top lieutenants, we'll have leverage to dismantle the organization piece by piece." Diaz frowned. "This feels impossible. We're going into their stronghold, surrounded by their people. What if they see through us?" Emma met his gaze, her voice steady. "That's why we've planned for every contingency. Stick to the plan. Trust your training, and don't lose focus." The resort. The following evening, Emma and her team arrived at the resort under the guise of catering staff. The sprawling property was a study in luxury. Marble walkways, cascading fountains, and lush greenery that hid the high-tech security infrastructure. Uniformed guards patrolled the perimeter, their eyes sharp and their weapons conspicuous. Emma's earpiece crackled as Hart whispered, "I count 6 guards at the main entrance, 2 by the service dock, cameras on every corner. We're walking into a fortress." "Stick to the plan," Emma replied, her voice calm despite the nerves twisting in her gut. As they unloaded crates of supplies from the catering van, Emma scanned the area, noting every potential exit, every security blind spot. Diaz, carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, caught her eye and gave a subtle nod. They were in. Inside, the resort's grand ballroom was a hive of activity. Syndicate members from around the world mingled under the glittering chandeliers, their conversations a mix of languages and veiled threats. At the center of it all was Victor Cardenas's successor, a man Matheson had identified as Damien Kravik. Ruthless and cunning, Kravik was rumored to be the syndicate's enforcer, a man who dealt in violence and intimidation with surgical precision. Emma kept her head down, blending in as she moved through the room with a tray of champagne flutes. Her earpiece buzzed with Hart's voice. Kravik's moving toward the private lounge. Might be worth following. She spotted Kravik slipping through a side door guarded by two imposing men. The door closed behind him, but not before Emma glimpsed a briefcase in his hand, likely containing documents vital to the syndicate's operations. "Dias, take over here," Emma whispered, setting her tray down. "Hart, meet me by the north corridor." The chase. Emma and Hart followed Kravik's trail, navigating the labyrinthine hallways of the resort. The private lounge was tucked away in a secluded wing, its opulence starkly contrasting the cold calculation of the people inside. Through a crack in the door, Emma saw Kravik and three other men seated around a table, their conversation low and intense. She adjusted the microphone hidden in her uniform, capturing snippets of their dialogue. "New routes through East Africa. Less heat than the Mediterranean. Need to move fast. Singapore's customs crackdown is affecting the pipeline." Emma exchanged a glance with Hart. This was the intel they needed, proof of the syndicate's operations and its global reach. But getting closer meant risking detection. Suddenly, Kravik stood, gesturing toward the door. Emma and Hart ducked into a nearby alcove, holding their breath as he stepped into the hallway. He was alone, the briefcase still in hand. "Now or never," Emma murmured. Hart nodded, drawing a tranquilizer gun from under his jacket. With a practiced aim, he fired a single dart into Kravik's neck. The enforcer staggered, his hand going to his throat before he slumped to the floor. Emma and Hart moved quickly, dragging his unconscious body into a nearby utility closet. Extraction. Emma opened the briefcase, her breath hitching as she scanned the contents. Bank statements, offshore accounts, coded messages. It was a roadmap to the syndicate's financial network. She snapped photos of every document, her fingers flying over her phone. Hart kept watch, his ear to the door. "We're running out of time. Someone's going to notice he's missing." Emma nodded, closing the briefcase. "We need to extract him. If we can flip Kravik, he could give us the leverage we need to dismantle the syndicate." Dias's voice crackled in their earpieces. "Guards are starting to mobilize. I think they know something's up." "Stay in position," Emma ordered. "We're on our way." Dragging Kravik's limp body, Emma and Hart made their way to the service dock, using back corridors to avoid detection. Dias met them halfway, his face pale but determined. "I rigged a distraction near the kitchen," Dias said, his voice tight. "It'll buy us a few minutes." The distant sound of an explosion reverberated through the resort, followed by shouts and the stampede of guards moving toward the disturbance. Emma gave Dias a tight smile. "Good work. Let's move." The escape. The service dock was eerily quiet as they loaded Kravik into the catering van. Hart took the wheel while Emma and Dias secured their unconscious prisoner in the back. As the van pulled away from the resort, Emma exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But the sense of relief was short-lived. Through the rear window, she saw the headlights of a convoy in pursuit. The syndicate wasn't going to let Kravik go without a fight. "Hold on," Hart shouted, swerving onto the narrow coastal road. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the van's reinforced sides. Emma gritted her teeth, returning fire through the rear doors. Dias scrambled to reload, his hand shaking but steady. "Can this thing go any faster?" Emma barked. "Working on it," Hart growled, narrowly avoiding a spike strip laid across the road. Ahead, the lights of Jakarta's cityscape loomed, a chaotic maze of traffic and noise. If they could reach the city, they might lose their pursuers in the congestion. "Take the next left," Emma shouted, her voice rising over the chaos. Hart obeyed, the van careening onto a side street. The convoy struggled to keep up, their larger vehicles unable to navigate the tight turns. Within minutes, the team merged onto a crowded boulevard, blending into the sea of cars. The convoy fell back, their presence swallowed by the city's chaos. Emma leaned back against the van's wall, her chest heaving. Aftermath. Back at their secondary safe house, Emma secured Kravik to a chair, his wrists and ankles bound. When he finally regained consciousness, his eyes were filled with fury and confusion. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he hissed. Emma stepped forward, her expression ice-cold. "No, Kravik, you have no idea what's coming." As the team prepared to interrogate their captive, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. They had landed a critical blow, but the syndicate wouldn't take this lying down. Somewhere, in the shadows, the real masterminds were already plotting their next move. The fall of Titans. The safe house was a dimly lit apartment on the outskirts of Jakarta, chosen for its anonymity and secure layout. Viktor Kravik sat bound to a chair in the center of the living room, his tailored suit rumpled, and his demeanor oscillating between fury and disdain. Emma Carter circled him like a predator stalking wounded prey, her eyes locked onto his, unflinching. Hart and Diaz stood nearby, weapons holstered but at the ready, their presence a silent reminder that Kravik's options were limited. The briefcase they had seized from him sat open on a table, its contents meticulously catalogued and photographed. Every document was a brick in the foundation of the syndicate's global empire, and Emma intended to bring it all crashing down. Breaking Kravik. "You don't have much time," Kravik sneered, his voice gravelly but defiant. "Whatever you think you've done tonight, it won't matter. They'll come for me, and when they do, you'll all be dead." Emma didn't respond immediately. She simply reached for a document from the briefcase, a bank transfer linked to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, and held it up. "This transfer ties you directly to a shipment that killed 27 people in a single week. Overdoses from your poison. How much is a human life worth to you, Kravik?" $10,000. 50. Kravik's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. She leaned closer, her voice low and cold. "You're right about one thing. They're coming, but not for you. They'll cut their losses. You're a liability now, and you know what happens to liabilities." Kravik flinched, a subtle but telling movement. Emma pressed on. "We pulled Matheson. We pulled Keller. And now we have you. You can either sit there and wait for them to make you disappear, or you can help us tear down this empire and walk away with your life." He chuckled dryly. "Walk away? You're naive, Agent Carter. There's no walking away from this." Emma didn't waver. "There is if you give me the names I need. Every lieutenant, every financier, every shipment hub. You know their playbook, Kravik. Hand it over, and I'll make sure you live to see another sunrise." For the first time, hesitation flickered in his eyes. He was calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he leaned back in the chair and let out a resigned sigh. "If I do this, I want protection. Witness relocation, immunity from prosecution." "You'll get protection," Emma said, her tone sharp. "But immunity? That depends on the value of the information you provide." Kravik narrowed his eyes but relented. "Fine. I'll tell you what you want to know. The syndicate's network." Over the next 3 hours, Kravik spilled everything. The syndicate was larger and more entrenched than Emma had feared. It wasn't just a drug operation. It was a multi-pronged criminal enterprise spanning human trafficking, arms dealing, and corporate corruption. Its tentacles reached into law enforcement, politics, and international finance. Kravik outlined the syndicate's leadership structure, a council of 5 individuals known as the Architects. Each was responsible for a different sector of operations, and together they controlled billions in illegal revenue. "The summit tonight wasn't just about logistics," Kravik explained. "It was about succession. With Cardenas gone, they needed to appoint a new representative to oversee this region. That's why I was here." "And who are the Architects?" Emma asked, her pen poised over a notepad. Kravik hesitated, then began naming names. Some were aliases, but others were real, identifiable figures. powerful individuals with public personas, as philanthropists, CEOs, and government officials. When he finished, Emma leaned back, her mind racing. The names were explosive, and pursuing them would require resources far beyond what her team had at its disposal. Hart, who had been silently listening, spoke up. "If these names get out, it'll be a global scandal. Governments will be forced to act." "Which is exactly why we need to be careful," Emma said. "We can't just drop this in someone's lap and hope for the best. We need a coordinated strike." The counterattack. As dawn approached, the safe house's tension reached a breaking point. Kravik had been sedated and secured in a locked room, but Emma knew their window of safety was closing. The syndicate wouldn't let them walk away unchallenged. Diaz, pacing near the window, froze. "We've got movement," he said, his voice urgent. Emma joined him, peering through the blinds. A convoy of black SUVs was parked a block away. Men in tactical gear were disembarking, their movements precise and coordinated. "Black Horizon," Hart muttered, his hand already on his weapon. Emma's mind raced. They had planned for this. "We stick to the extraction plan," she said. "Diaz, you're on Kravik. Get him to the secondary vehicle. Hart, you're with me. We'll cover the rear." The team moved quickly, grabbing their gear and preparing for a firefight. Emma checked her weapon, her heart pounding but her focus razor-sharp. The first shot rang out as they exited the safe house. Emma and Hart returned fire, using parked cars and alleyways for cover. Diaz, carrying Kravik, sprinted toward the extraction vehicle, a battered van parked a block away. "Go. I'll cover you," Emma shouted, laying down suppressive fire. The firefight intensified, bullets ricocheting off concrete and metal. Black Horizon's operatives moved with military precision, but Emma's team was equally disciplined. Hart took out 2 attackers with well-placed shots, but more kept coming. As Diaz reached the van, a grenade landed near his feet. Without hesitation, he dove forward, shielding Kravik with his body as the explosion rocked the street. When the smoke cleared, Diaz was bleeding but alive, dragging Kravik into the van. "Move, Diaz," Emma barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. The van roared to life, peeling away from the scene as Emma and Hart fought their way to a secondary vehicle. With a final burst of fire, they disabled the last of their pursuers and jumped into the car. The final push. Hours later, the team regrouped at a U.S. consulate in Jakarta. Kravik was handed over to federal custody, and the intel he provided was secured in a classified server. Emma's body ached from the night's events, but her mind was already on the next steps. "This isn't over," she told Hart and Diaz as they sat in a conference room. "We've got the names, but we need to coordinate with international agencies to take down the architects. This operation won't end with arrests. It'll take dismantling their entire infrastructure." Hart nodded. "And what about us? We're in deep now. The syndicate won't forget what we've done." "We'll be ready," Emma said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about taking them down. It's about making sure they can never rebuild." Diaz, his arm in a sling from the grenade blast, managed a tired smile. "Count me in. I didn't come this far to walk away now." The ripple effect. In the weeks that followed, Emma's team worked tirelessly to coordinate an unprecedented international operation. Warrants were issued, assets were frozen, and high-profile arrests made headlines around the world. The syndicate's empire began to crumble under the weight of its exposure. But Emma knew the fight wasn't truly over. Corruption didn't die. It adapted. Still, as she stood in the DEA headquarters months later, watching news coverage of the latest arrests, she felt a rare sense of accomplishment. "Small steps," she murmured to herself, "one battle at a time." And for now, that was enough.